there are parents who, again, your general philosophy of parenting or critique of parenting is that we tend to love what we recognize in ourselves and not love. It doesn't have to be hate, but not love those that are different from us. In your experience, in this 10 years of research, it seems to me, and maybe it's a self-selecting group, but it seems to me that these parents that you talk to, I mean, love is just sort of, it challenges all of us average people to even deal with this notion of love compared to the kind of love expressed by these parents, and I suspect vice versa with these children toward their parents. Do parents of the disabled or the exceptional children, do they love more than the rest of us?
I certainly don't think that we can say that they love more than the rest of us, but I think that their love faces a lot of challenges, and that in the process of overcoming those challenges, they acquire a very specific vividness and power of love, which is somewhat different from the love that people feel for children who don't pose any challenges. I mean, I think dealing with something difficult, you either decide you're going to get deeply right in the middle of it and be so connected to it, or you're going to withdraw entirely. And we all know there are people who give up their disabled children for adoption, there are people who abuse disabled children, there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on.
Yeah.
But that story is kind of obvious. My book was about how people manage to find a way to seek meaning in those experiences. But I should add, there's a built-in bias, because actually parents who dislike and reject their children are mostly not that interested in being interviewed.
Yes, I see. So there is some self-selection involved. It's not their proudest moment that they gave up this kid. Okay, again, out of the myriad of issues, one of the fascinating things is that right now, let's deal with the issue of Down syndrome. You can do amniocentesis and actually find out if your kid's going to be born with Down syndrome. There are abortions that respond to that. What is your response to this whole idea of, now that we're in a position where we medically can determine what our kids are going to be like, what are the strengths and what are the dangers for you, having done the research that you've done for this book?
So I should begin by saying that I'm an abortion libertarian, and I think everyone should be able to have an abortion if she wants to have it, if she and her partner want to have it, whatever the situation is. I don't want to restrict anyone's access to abortion.
Right.
What I wouldn't mind doing is having people understand better what the choice is that they're making when they decide to terminate a pregnancy, and to know more about what it would be like to have a child with Down syndrome, and to understand what the experience of those children is like better and more vividly. I think there's a danger in having entire segments of the population disappear, and there's an irony too, which is for Down syndrome, for example, the prognosis for Down syndrome is so immeasurably better than it was even 20 years ago. 50 years ago, people with Down syndrome lived to be about 20. Now, the life expectancy is over 50. I mean, the change has been enormous. New educational things have allowed people with Down syndrome to acquire more language, to function professionally. I just had a note from someone whose child is in my book who said, since you did the book, he has acquired the ability to travel independently, takes the bus every day, has a job he seems to like, is earning an income. I mean, the breakthroughs are incredible. And right while we're having those breakthroughs in the sort of social advancement of these people, we're also having the medical breakthroughs that mean the population may be eliminated. It's like those operas where the hero realizes he loves the heroine just as she expires.
Yes. Oh, that's fascinating. And the other thing that I found very eye-opening was that not only are the average or normal people, they are selecting the kind of baby, they're practically designer babies, but you can also have, and I forget there's a phrase, but like disability babies, that if you are deaf and you are going to have someone carry your child, you can find someone, a deaf donor, for instance, and the kid will actually be born deaf. That to me was eye-opening, that someone would actually, from the average, point of view, be like, you actually are wishing or wanting what is commonly called a disability on your own children. How controversial is that, and where do you stand on that?
It's very highly controversial, and I have a kind of neutral stance on it. I mean, I think it can be very difficult to be, for example, Latino in the United States, but nobody questions the right of Latino people to have Latino children, and
Right.
nobody says you really should have blonde children because they actually have an easier time of things. So I think wanting a child who's like you is understandable, and if you're part of that deaf culture, which, as I've said, is a very vivid, very impressive culture, and if your primary language is sign language and you want a child who'll be in that same culture with that same language, I don't know, Orthodox Jews want to have children who will grow up and be Hasidim also. I think it's a valid point of view.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's necessarily the best idea, and I don't particularly feel any compulsion to pass on any of my own qualities that have made my life somewhat difficult to my children. I just assume that they not be depressive, which I was. I'm not particularly hoping that they'll be gay. So I think seeking it out always feels it's a little over politicized to me. But I can see where it comes from, and I don't think it's as obviously ghastly as people tend to think.
And again, and this deals with the deaf community and dwarves too. It's fascinating that you've done a study, or someone has done a study that you cite, that says that, for instance, I think it's deaf children with deaf parents are happier, or it might be that little people with little people parents are happier than little people of full height parents and all. That there is a happiness quotient, which I think all parents, even the worst of parents, probably wish upon their kid some degree of happiness. That you actually get along better, or they're happier if they have that vertical identity that we were talking about, rather than a horizontal identity. Is that correct?
So deaf children of deaf parents, dwarfs who are born to dwarf parents, and people in various other categories do, in fact, have an easier time because they grow up with a sense of self-acceptance rather than with parents who keep saying, we really love you, but there's something wrong with you, and we're going to do our best to make it go away, or to overlook it, or to somehow get away from it. So it's not that I think deaf children of deaf parents are happier than hearing children of hearing parents,
right,
but they have an easier time than deaf children of hearing parents.
Yes. Okay. Again, so many directions. You mentioned politicization. I wanted to ask you. You have a chapter on rape. This is about parents of children. They are the rape victims, and the children are the product of those rapes.
Right.
Now, what's the basic take on that? What is the thrust of your chapter about that, for instance? And then I want to follow it up with a more political question.
So my idea is that this sense of having a child who is foreign or different or in some profound way difficult to love can come not only from the inherent qualities of the child, such as Down syndrome or deafness, but can also come from what the child does, as in my crime chapter, or simply from where the child originates. So those mothers have children who feel foreign and alien and who are difficult to love and accept, just like the children in the other chapters.
Okay. And the reason I mentioned the political stuff, this issue came up in the recent, not the presidential race only tangentially, but with a couple of senators who are arguing that, the method of conception, shouldn't alter the fact. I was wondering if you have any particular or unique spin on that issue, given the research you've done on the topic.
The method of conception in these cases has a profound and fundamental and lasting effect on the relationship between the mother and the child. It cannot be otherwise.
Okay.
There are some women who are up for it. There are some women who are not. And I believe squarely that they should be able to choose. But what was interesting in interviewing the people I talked to, who were people who had chosen to keep these children for a variety of reasons, religious reasons, psychological reasons, practical reasons, is that while many of them described struggling with the children they had, some, not all by any means, but some of them also described developing a deep connection to those children and ultimately moving past the scene of conception. So there was one woman who was particularly moving to me, who I interviewed. She had been brutally raped at 16 by strangers. She had had a horrible, horrible set of experiences, not been able to go on with her career. When I interviewed her, I said, do you think much about the man who raped you? And she said, I used to think of him with anger, but now just with pity. And I thought, oh, with pity because he's so unevolved. And she said, no, I think of him with pity because he has a beautiful daughter and 2 beautiful grandchildren. And he doesn't know that, and I do. So as it turns out, I'm the lucky one.
Ouch! Yeah, I know. That your book is so full of these kinds of heartbreaking stories. I love the case too, and I'm trying to remember now what the disability was. But this daughter who fit into one of your categories, with all that the mother had done for the child, the mother then developed cancer, and the child shaved her head off in sort of concordance with the mother to kind of, there's this circle of life that's so profound in your book. It's really an inspiring book, despite the categories that you deal with, I think.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was a dwarf and her mother, and she just said, I know what it's like to be different and to feel different by yourself, and I wanted to keep my mother company in the way she was feeling different.
Okay, when you read your book, you come off, not you, but the reader feels, well, these people are just better than me. I mean, in other words, I'm wondering have you put them on a pedestal because of the brilliance of your writing and the openness and honesty of your interviews? That these people, they seem to glow with a kind of, not unattainable, but certainly hard to reach kind of acceptance of life that I think a lot of us would find, if not impossible, very difficult.
You know, a lot of the people I interviewed to whom I said, I can't imagine how you do it. I can't imagine how you can deal with this. I can't imagine how you rise to the occasion. A lot of them said to me, I couldn't have imagined it either until the occasion presented itself. Having said that, I think I've presented people with a lot of flaws, a lot of foibles, a lot of whom had marriages that fell apart, some of whom have had troubled other children. So when I do a synopsis of the book, it's about this great nobility, but I think when one really reads it, one feels like there are a lot of people here who are struggling in a big way.